I'm Molly Superthorpe. Welcome to my channel, where I offer bite-sized tutorials and demonstrations in calligraphy, hand lettering, and illustration, and upload a brand new video every Friday. Today, I'm going to teach you from start to finish how to create this drop cap letter G in Procreate. If you'd like to follow along from home and use the same colors that I'm using, you can download the swatch palette for free on my blog. Just visit the link in the description, and you'll also find there a link to another video that I did about how to install swatches in Procreate in case you're not already familiar with that. Let's start by creating a new canvas. Mine is going to be square, 8 by 8 inches at 300 dpi. Now I like to set my background to something other than white, so I'm coming to that swatch palette and choosing a peachy color. Now I want to create some guidelines for myself, and I love to do that with bright contrasting colors, so I'm choosing this hot pink and then going over to my square grid pattern brush, which I just swipe over my whole canvas to create this square sort of graph paper background that I can then sketch over and turn off later so that nobody ever knows I used it. Now on a new blank layer, I'm going to start my pencil sketches. And I've come over to my pencil set and selected my favorite pencil brush, which is aptly called Molly's favorite letter sketching pencil. I'll start with drawing a really skinny rectangle in the middle of my canvas, and rather than lifting my pencil right when I'm finished, I'm going to continue holding it down for a moment so that this snaps to a shape, because I want a pretty even, perfect rectangle. Now I'll reduce the opacity of that rectangle and make a new blank layer on top of it. And here I'm going to mark roughly the centers of the rectangle, the top, bottom, and sides. The reason for this is that now when I'm sketching out this G, I'm able to kind of aim for and hit those points so that it's a pretty geometric and symmetrical G. That's what I'm going for with this particular lettering style. You can see that I'm somewhat following the grid, but at the same time, I do appreciate things looking hand-lettered and not looking like they were made by a computer. So I tend to keep things optically geometric rather than trying to aim for extreme precision. Now I'll reduce the opacity of that sketched out G and make a new blank layer on top of it. Coming over to my monoline pen and selecting black from my palette, I'm going to make one smooth monoline over top of that G sketch. And for the crossbar of this G, I'm coming in and snapping a line so that it's perfectly straight. And again, I'm doing that by continuing to hold my pencil down when I reach the end of the line. With my monoline sketch done, I'll come and copy or duplicate that layer. And with the new duplicate, I'll reduce the opacity a little bit, come over to my selection, make sure I'm on freeform, and then I'll drag out the top, bottom, and sides to approximately 2 squares larger on my grid. So basically I'm making the top 2 squares up and the bottom 2 squares down, etc. Then again, I'll duplicate that original monoline layer, reduce its opacity, and do the reverse. Now by tapping the top layer and merging down, I've merged those 2 new guideline layers. Now I can create a new blank layer on top of that and return to my pencil brush. I'm going to just start by quickly sketching over those new guidelines for myself, and then coming in and by hand drawing 2 squares outside of the G's crossbar and the end point of the top curve. So the end result here you can see is that I have a sketch approximately 2 squares larger on both sides than my original monoline. Now I can turn off those guidelines I made and reduce the opacity of my pencil and create a new blank layer on top of that. Returning to my monoline pen, this time I'm using gray instead of black, and I'm reducing the size of my monoline pen a little bit just because the smaller the monoline is, the more squared off the corners I draw can be. So I want to have pretty crisp corners here, and that's why I'm going to draw this with a smaller monoline and then fill it in. To fill it, I'm just tapping that gray swatch and dragging it over, dropping it inside my filled space. Now I can just come back in and do a tiny bit of refining. Some of the edges were a little bit wonky, some of the ends didn't meet up perfectly, and some of the curves really needed to be refined. Now I want to just move that gray layer below my original monoline so that they're layered one on top of the other and I can see the monoline in the center. Coming over to the yellow in my palette, while I'm on the monoline layer, I'm going to drag and drop it on top of the monoline so that that gets turned yellow. Next, I'm going to duplicate my gray layer, and on the top one, I'm going to drag and drop my off-white color. And on the bottom one here, when I select that and I turn off my guidelines and all of that, I'm going to keep it gray, but select it. And as you can see, I'm moving it a bit up and to the right. This arrow will show you roughly the way that I'm considering the light to be hitting, because this gray is going to be serving as the drop shadow. So if the light's coming in from the bottom left, the shadow would be going to the top right. Now I'm going to reduce the opacity of that drop shadow layer to about 60% and make sure I set it to multiply. Next step is to make a new blank layer on top of that white layer, so underneath the monoline and above the white layer. Now I'm coming to turn on Drawing Guide and hit Edit Drawing Guide. And here I can use the green node at the bottom of my grid to turn the entire grid's direction. And I'm turning it to the right, or counterclockwise a little bit. And what I'm trying to do is get the lines to intersect where this arrow is pointing. So in between the corner of the G's crossbar and the outer corner of its corresponding drop shadow. Now when I come back to my artwork and I'm on that blank layer that's under the yellow monoline and on top of the white background, I'll tap it once and then select Clipping Mask. Then I can use a gray color and my monoline brush to draw in lines that connect these points. So for example, you can see here that I'm drawing a line that adheres roughly to the straight lines of the guides and also runs in between the points where the drop shadow behind intersects with the white layer above. Now I'll just turn off that grid because I don't need it anymore, and I'll enlarge my monoline brush and just quickly fill in the spaces that you can see here. What we're doing is we're creating a sense of dimension within the G. If you consider where the light source was coming from the bottom left, every place that that light would be hitting remains white, and then every place that I colored in is where the shadow would fall behind the yellow monoline. So imagine that monoline is like a ridge that's coming upward and creating dimension, and what's behind it would sort of fall into shadow. Now I don't want these to remain gray, so I'm going to drag and drop this darker peach color onto the colored in gray parts to turn it a darker peach. Next, I'll make a new blank layer on top of that, tap it once, and hit Clipping Mask. This is going to make sure that everything I'm about to draw on that layer only will color in the portions below it. So the gray portions that I colored a moment ago are going to be the only areas that are going to be affected by what I'm about to put on this blank layer. Next, tap that layer below, the layer that's now peach, and hit Select so that you've selected all of the pixels on that layer. Now I'm coming over to my backgrounds brush set and choosing my Pinstripe background brush. I want to make sure that the direction of my canvas right now is the way that you see it, so that my G is perfectly upright, because this brush actually adheres to the angle of your canvas, and I want the direction of these pinstripes to be straight up and down. So I'm drawing over that whole layer, and I'm doing it very roughly because, again, this is a clipping mask, so everything that I draw is limited to only the pixels in the layer below it. This pinstripe background brush has some texture to it. It's not like a really crisp pinstripe, so it has sort of a vintage look to it already. Now I'll change the blending mode of the pinstripe layer to multiply and slightly reduce its opacity, and change the blending mode of the peach layer to screen and reduce its opacity a little bit too. By swiping on all of my layers together, I can select them all and then tap Group so that I can adjust the placement of the whole group at once. Now we have to add texture to the background. So underneath my group, I'm making a new blank layer, and I'm immediately setting it to multiply. Coming back over to my background brush set, I'm selecting my old paper background brush, and just sweeping it over the canvas in the background. You'll see that this creates like a really nice vintagey texture, almost like a gesso. Now we will add a bit of texture on top of the whole canvas so that it affects the G as well. Making a new blank layer on top of my group, I'll come over to my textures brush set and choose my Watercolor Wash 2 texture brush. Now I'll sort of splotch this all over the canvas. I'm not doing one continuous sweeping motion. I'm kind of almost like blotting my Apple Pencil so that it creates these overlapping shapes with translucency. And I'm putting more on the edges to create sort of a vignette effect. Now I'm making sure that layer is set to a linear burn blending mode and the opacity is reduced quite dramatically so that I get an overall texture without looking too painted on. Now let's add some texture to the drop shadow itself because I don't like my drop shadows to be too crisp. That's a little bit unrealistic. So I'll make a new blank layer on top of my gray drop shadow layer, tap it once and hit clipping mask, and then select black from my palette. In my brushes, I'm going over to my texture set and choosing the noise spray brush. And this is kind of subtle, but just keep your eye on the drop shadow itself. You'll see that speckles and some noise and texture appear there. To finish off my drop shadow effect, I'm going to duplicate my gray drop shadow layer, and on the bottom of the two, I'll select that and move it slightly down and to the left so that it's only slightly peeking out from behind the G. Now we have to blur this so that it really looks like the G is sitting on top of the paper that would then be casting this shadow. To do that, come up to your adjustments palette and select blur, and then use your Apple Pencil to slide left and right across the screen to adjust the level of blur of that layer. I'm blurring it quite a lot because I really just want to create this fuzzy, dark color behind the G to really create a dramatic separation in shadow between the G and the sharper drop shadow. And there you have it. This fun sort of geometric drop cap G is complete. All of the brushes used today are from my Ultimate Lettering and Calligraphy Procreate kit, which is linked below, or you can head to molly.st/toolkit. Thank you so much for following along, and I'll see you back here next week.